There is a very curious moment in life that almost no one notices while it is happening. It is when you still deeply desire something, but you no longer feel that urgent pressure tightening inside. The mind still knows what it wants. The heart still recognizes the direction, but something has changed in the way you relate to that desire. The tension decreases, the need decreases, and quietly a different feeling emerges, almost as if part of you already knows that it will happen at the right time. Many people confuse this state with giving up. They think that if they stop chasing, things will move even further away. But what almost no one explains is that, in many cases, it is exactly at this point that reality begins to reorganize itself. Because the law of attraction does not respond to how much you insist, it responds to the internal state you maintain while you desire. And there is a subtle change, almost invisible, that transforms anxious pursuit into natural magnetism. When this shift happens, you stop living like someone who is trying to reach something distant and begin to behave like someone who is simply becoming compatible with it. This is where the first important turning point begins, the inversion of the energy of pursuit. For much of life, we learn that in order to achieve something, we must chase it with all our strength. Insist, pressure, think about it all the time. But there is a silent detail in this process. When someone is constantly chasing something, the mind ends up reinforcing a very specific internal message. I still don't have this. Each attempt loaded with anxiety ends up confirming the absence of what is desired. And it is exactly here that many people enter a cycle that seems impossible to break. The more they try, the more they feel it still hasn't arrived. And the more they feel it hasn't arrived, the more effort they put in. The law of attraction, however, does not respond to effort itself. It responds to the predominant state that accompanies that effort. That is why stopping the chase does not mean giving up. It means something much deeper, leaving the frequency of lack. It is like changing the way you position yourself internally. Instead of thinking, I need to achieve this soon, something begins to shift toward, I am becoming someone ready to live this. And when this change happens, the internal field reorganizes. The desire continues to exist, but it stops being a desperate request and becomes simply a clear direction. And when the direction is clear, something very interesting begins to happen. You realize that perhaps excessive effort was never the smartest path, and this is exactly where the next understanding appears. Excessive effort as a sign of misalignment. There is a very big difference between dedication and tension. Dedication is when you move because something makes sense to you. Tension is when you move out of fear that nothing will happen if you stop. And often excessive effort reveals exactly that, an attempt to compensate for an internal insecurity. The mind thinks, if I insist a little more, maybe now it will work. But interestingly, when true alignment exists, action does not disappear. It simply changes its quality. Instead of heavy and repetitive movements, more natural decisions begin to emerge. You continue acting, you continue building, but you are no longer trying to force every result. It is as if life begins to respond with less resistance. Conversations happen at the right time. Ideas arise with more clarity. Paths that once seemed blocked begin to show small openings. Because the internal state has stopped pushing reality and has begun to allow it to organize itself together with you. And when this state stabilizes for long enough, something even quieter begins to happen. The mind enters a very specific type of focus, a focus that has no anxiety, but has direction. And it is exactly this focus that begins to reorganize reality in ways that we often only notice afterward. And it is exactly at this point that many people begin to notice something curious. When the mind stops pushing the outcome all the time, a different type of attention appears, calmer, more stable, quieter. This is where we enter something that almost no one teaches clearly. The silent focus that reorganizes reality. Stopping the chase does not mean abandoning the desire. It means keeping the desire alive, without that constant pressure about when it will happen. This type of focus is very different from anxious focus. Anxious focus thinks about it all the time. It tries to control time, people, and circumstances. Silent focus is different. It knows what it wants, but it does not need to mentally repeat it all day to convince itself. And there is a simple exercise, but extremely powerful, but that almost no one practices. During the day, observe how you react when you think about what you desire. Do not observe only the thought. Observe the body. Ask yourself, when I think about this, does my body relax or tense up? If there is tension, do something that completely changes the pattern. Pause for a few seconds and imagine the following scene. You are already living what you desire, but not in an extraordinary way. In a normal way, imagine an ordinary day living that reality, having breakfast, responding to messages, returning home at the end of the day. This small exercise teaches your brain something very important, that is not something distant, it is something familiar. And when something becomes familiar to your internal system, resistance begins to decrease. Now, something interesting. If you notice that this type of reflection changes the way you see your own mind, take a second now and subscribe to the channel. Not just to follow the next content, but because each video here works as a constant reminder to maintain this more conscious mental state in daily life. And when you reinforce this type of perception repeatedly, something very important begins to happen. Your own mind begins to operate differently. And that leads us to another point that completely changes the process. Because there is a specific feeling that transforms desire into magnetism. And almost no one notices when they start developing it. The power of the feeling of sufficiency. There is a very interesting moment in the manifestation process. It is when a person realizes that they are no longer waiting for something external to complete them. They begin to feel that somehow they are already okay while building what they desire. This does not mean losing ambition. It means stopping living in a state of lack. Because when someone believes they will only be happy after something happens, the predominant vibration continues to be one of absence. But when a feeling of sufficiency appears, even before the result, something changes deeply. The person continues to desire growth, continues to seek new experiences, but they no longer feel that their life is incomplete now. And this state creates a very different kind of magnetism, because the world responds much more easily to those who move from fullness than to those trying to fill a void. At this point, many opportunities begin to appear in a curiously natural way. Conversations arise, ideas appear, paths that once seemed impossible begin to become visible. Not because the universe suddenly decided to act, but because the internal state finally became compatible with what once seemed distant. And when this feeling stabilizes, something even more interesting begins to happen. The way you act changes completely, and small decisions begin to generate much bigger movements than before. When this internal state begins to change, something very interesting happens to the way you act. Decisions stop being born from hurry and begin to be born from clarity. And that leads us to the next point, which completely changes the way many people understand manifestation. Inspired action replaces chasing. For a long time, many people believe they need to act all the time. More effort, more attempts, more insistence. But when alignment truly begins to happen, the quality of action changes completely. You do not necessarily do more things. You do the right things. It is like someone trying to open several doors at the same time, until they realize that only one of them had been unlocked all along. Inspired action works like this. It does not come from the fear of missing an opportunity. It arises as a simple feeling of clarity. It might be an idea that appears suddenly, a conversation you feel like starting, a small decision that once seemed insignificant. And many times it is exactly these simple decisions that change an entire trajectory. Think about something common. Someone might spend months searching for job opportunities everywhere possible, but in a moment of clarity decides to speak with a specific person, learn a new skill, or test a small project. That decision seems minimal, but it can open the door that once seemed invisible. Because when action is born from alignment, it has direction. And direction always generates more results than movement without awareness. And when this type of action begins to appear more frequently, another very interesting phenomenon begins to happen. The person begins to realize that not everything needs to be planned or controlled by them. There is a part of the process that simply depends on allowing, the openness to receive. Many people know how to desire. They know how to visualize. They know how to set goals. But there is a part of the process that is almost never taught, knowing how to receive. Receiving requires something that may seem simple, but that for many people is difficult. Letting go of control. When someone tries to control exactly how something will happen, they end up limiting the possibilities of their own reality. The mind creates a single path and ignores all the others that could arise. But when there is openness, something different begins to happen. Opportunities appear in unexpected ways. A casual conversation brings a new idea. An unexpected meeting opens a path. A situation that seemed ordinary reveals a possibility that no one had noticed before. This happens because life does not organize itself only through rational planning. It also reorganizes itself through encounters, coincidences, and paths that arise at the right time. And when you learn to maintain this space of openness, something even more interesting happens. You realize that manifesting something is not an isolated event. It is a state that needs to be maintained. And this is exactly where we arrive at the final point that sustains this entire process. And this is exactly where many people discover what truly sustains the entire process. Because the real secret of manifestation is not only in the moment you decide to let go, nor only in the moment when you begin to act differently. It is in something much simpler, and at the same time, much more powerful. Maintaining the state that naturally attracts many people managed to feel alignment for a few moments. After watching inspiring content, after a deep reflection, or after a day when everything seems to make sense. But the next day the mind returns to the same place as before. Worry, doubt, hurry, and this back and forth creates an unstable field. Reality begins to move, but the mind returns to emitting signals of lack. That is why the most important point is not just letting go once. It is learning to maintain a more stable internal state throughout life. And this does not require complex techniques. In fact, it begins with very simple things. True gratitude for what already exists. Clarity about the direction you want to follow. And enough presence to not allow the mind to automatically return to fear. When these three elements begin to be part of your day, something changes. The vibration stops being a momentary effort and becomes a natural state. And when that happens, something very interesting begins to appear. You realize that you are no longer trying to attract all the time. Opportunities appear more frequently. The right people begin to show up at the right moments. Ideas arrive when you least expect them. Not because you are forcing reality, but because the internal state you now maintain is compatible with what you want to live. And when this state becomes part of who you are, attracting stops being a constant effort. It simply becomes a natural consequence of the way you think, feel, and position yourself in life.